A conservatory at midnight, glass walls reflecting candlelight like scattered stars. The scent of orange blossoms so thick Lady Isolde Greymark could taste it on her tongue. Her hands were trembling as she lifted her chin and met the gaze of Caspian, Nightborn Duke of Ravenshire, the man London called the Phantom Duke. "I've never been kissed," she said, and her voice did not waver even as heat flooded her cheeks. He stared at her as though she had struck him, all the practiced control draining from his face until only something raw and startled remained. 6 weeks earlier, she had corrected a philosopher in a crowded salon and changed the course of both their lives. Now she stood before him in borrowed courage and her own truth, waiting to discover whether honesty was the thing that would save them or the thing that would break them both. London wore the night like a widow's veil. Gas lamps flickered along empty streets, casting shadows that stretched and bent across cobblestones, still damp from afternoon rain. In a townhouse on the edge of Mayfair, where respectability met obscurity, a single candle burned in an upstairs window. Lady Isolde Greymark dipped her pen in ink and continued writing. The words came easily now, after 6 years of practice. 6 years of hiding behind a name that was not her own, building arguments in the dark hours when London slept, and she was finally blessedly alone. The essay beneath her hand was the 14th she had submitted to the examiner under the pseudonym Candidus, truth teller. Tonight's subject was the education of women, or rather, the systematic denial of it. Her hand moved across the page in steady strokes, forming sentences that would be read by men who would never know they came from a woman's mind. Men who had debated these ideas over breakfast, quote them in their clubs, and never once imagined the author wore silk gowns and worried about her sister's debut season. The clock on the mantel chimed midnight. She read over the last paragraph. Strong, clear. The kind of logic that would make R.M. respond. He always did. R.M., the mysterious essayist who had been her intellectual sparring partner for 2 years now. Sometimes they agreed, building on each other's arguments like architects constructing a shared cathedral of thought. More often they clashed, and those were the essays Isolde loved best. She had never met him, would never meet him, she assumed. That was the nature of anonymous discourse. It was safer this way. Downstairs, a floorboard creaked. Then came the soft pad of feet, the whisper of fabric against the banister. She hid the essay beneath correspondence and rose to open the door. Cordelia stood in the hallway, wrapped in a dressing gown of pale blue silk, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. At 19, she looked younger in candlelight, more girl than woman, though London would expect her to be, both in 3 weeks' time when she made her debut. "Another nightmare?" Isolde asked quietly. Cordelia shook her head. She held something in her hands, a leather-bound book, worn soft with age. "I found it," she whispered. "In the attic. I was looking for Mother's pearl combs, and I found this instead. In poem." She held out the book. Isolde took it, her heart beginning to pound. She recognized the leather, the gold tooling that had faded to bronze. Her mother's journal, one she had thought lost when their mother died, bringing Cordelia into the world. "Have you read it?" Isolde asked. "Some." Cordelia's voice was small. "Izzy, she was like you. She wrote things, philosophy, politics, all under a false name." The floor seemed to tilt beneath Isolde's feet. She carried the journal back to her desk. Together they sat in the pool of candlelight, and Isolde opened the book with trembling hands. The first page bore a date, May 1790. 25 years ago, the entry began. "I must hide these thoughts somewhere, for they will not be quiet. Today my husband told me I think too much. He meant it as criticism. I took it as confirmation." Isolde read on page after page while Cordelia watched in silence. The journal documented not a life but a slow disappearance. Her mother had written for a radical pamphleteer under the name Veritas. She had argued for women's education, for legal reforms, for the right of wives to own property. And then, entry by entry, the light had dimmed. Her father had discovered the essays, had not beaten her, had not shouted, had simply explained with perfect rationality that such activities made him look weak. That if she loved him, truly loved him, she would stop. She had stopped. The final entry, dated 3 months before Cordelia's birth, read, "I have become what he needed. I no longer know what I need. Perhaps that is what love requires. Perhaps I am simply a coward." Isolde closed the journal. "She gave up everything," Cordelia said softly. "She gave up herself," Isolde corrected, "and it killed her. You don't know that." "Don't I?" Isolde looked at her sister. "She died bringing you into the world, Delia. Her body simply gave up. The physician said she had no will to fight, because she had already surrendered the only fight that mattered." Cordelia's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't ask to be born." "No." Isolde reached for her hand. "I'm not blaming you. I'm saying I understand now why I'm so afraid. Afraid of what? Isolde gestured to the hidden essay, to the journal, to the room itself. Of becoming her. Of letting someone that close and losing everything that makes me who I am. Is that why you've refused every proposal? 12 men in 7 years. And yes, that's why. But Izzy, not every man is father. Can you promise me that? Cordelia couldn't. Instead, she squeezed Isolde's hand and said, "Show me what you're writing." So Isolde did. She pulled out the essay and read it aloud, and when she finished, her sister's face was alight with something that looked like pride. "You're brilliant," Cordelia breathed. "Has RM responded to last week's essay?" "Not yet, but he will. He always does." "What do you think he's like?" Isolde smiled despite herself. "Old, probably. Some crusty philosopher who smells of pipe tobacco and wears the same waistcoat 3 days running." "You admire him," Cordelia said, grinning. "I admire his mind." Isolde threw a cushion at her. Cordelia caught it laughing, and the moment felt normal. But normal never lasted long in the Greymark house. The invitation arrived 3 days later. Lord Pembroke's literary salon was the sort of gathering where ideas mattered more than titles, though titles certainly helped secure an invitation. Isolde had been attending for 3 seasons now, always careful to speak just enough to seem engaged, but not so much that she overshadowed the men. It was exhausting, this constant calibration, but it was also the only place she could breathe. The salon met on Thursday evenings in Pembroke's library, a room lined with books that smelled of leather and wood smoke and the accumulated wisdom of centuries. Tonight the topic was Rousseau's social contract. They slipped into seats near the back. Cordelia immediately pulled out her sketchbook, a small leather volume she carried everywhere, though she never showed the contents to anyone but Isolde. Isolde listened to the arguments swirling around the room. The usual voices dominated Lord Pembroke himself, Mr. Ashford, the banker, Dr. Hughes, the physician. All men, all confident, all speaking over each other's. Then someone new spoke and the room went quiet. Rousseau's error, the voice said low and measured, was not in his ideal but in his assumption. He presumed the general will could exist in a structure that excluded half the population from participating in its formation. A society built on the consent of only its male citizens is not a contract. It is a fiction. Isolde turned, searching for the speaker. He sat in the corner, partially obscured by shadow. Tall, she could tell, even seated. Dark hair that caught the lamplight like polished jet. He wore evening clothes of perfect cut, but no ostentation, all blacks and grays, and when he leaned forward into the light, she saw his face. Beautiful, the word came unbidden. High cheekbones, a mouth that suggested both cruelty and kindness, and eyes that even from across the room appeared to be an impossible shade of amber. No, not amber, gold. "Who is that?" she whispered to Cordelia. Her sister was already sketching. "The Duke of Ravenshire, Caspian Nightborn. He never comes to these things. Never appears in society at all. They call him the Phantom Duke." "Wow, because no one ever sees him. He keeps to his estate, conducts all business through solicitors. Some say he's disfigured. Others say he's mad." No, Isolde thought. He looked like a man who had learned to carry solitude like a second skin. Lord Pembroke was sputtering a response, something about the natural order and women's delicate sensibilities. Isolde felt her jaw tighten. She had heard this argument 1,000 times, had dismantled it 100 times in print, and before she could stop herself, she spoke. "Lord Pembroke, with respect, your argument rests on a foundation of sand. You claim women's exclusion from political participation is natural, yet you must use law and custom and force to maintain it. If it were truly natural, it would require no enforcement. A river does not need laws to flow downhill." The room went silent. Every head turned toward her. "Lady Isolde Pembroke said, his tone dripping condescension. "How charming that you take an interest in these matters. But surely you see the difference between a river's course and the proper ordering of society." "I see that you have defined proper as whatever serves your interests," Isolde said. Her heart was racing, but her voice remained steady. "That is not philosophy, my lord. That is convenience dressed in Latin." Someone laughed, a low sound, brief but unmistakable. The Duke of Ravenshire was smiling. "Lady Isolde makes an excellent point," he said. "Perhaps, Lord Pembroke, you would care to address her argument rather than her gender." Pembroke's face flushed red. "Your Grace, I hardly think." "I know," the Duke said gently. "That is becoming apparent." The salon erupted in nervous laughter, but Isolde barely heard it. She was staring at the Duke and he was staring back, and something in his expression made her breath catch. Recognition. Not of her face, of something else, something deeper. That voice, that particular cadence of argument, the way he built logic like architecture, precise and unassailable. The Duke of Ravenshire spoke like R.M. wrote. She must have made some sound because Cordelia leaned close and whispered, "Are you all right? You've gone pale." "I'm fine," Isolde managed. I need some air." She rose and slipped from the room. The hallway was cooler, darker. She pressed her back against the wall and tried to think. It was impossible. RM was supposed to be some elderly scholar, not a duke who looked like he had been carved from shadow and starlight. Footsteps sounded in the hallway. She looked up. He stood there, the Phantom Duke, his golden eyes fixed on her with an intensity that should have frightened her. It didn't. "Forgive the intrusion," he said. "But I wanted to tell you that your argument was superb. Rousseau himself could not have done better." "Thank you, Your Grace." "Caspian," he said, "please. Titles are tedious, and I suspect you care as little for them as I do." She should have been scandalized. Instead, she heard herself say, "Only when they're used to silence better minds." He smiled, and the expression transformed his face from beautiful to something more dangerous, alive. "Tell me," he said, moving closer, "do you write beyond correspondence, I mean?" Her heart stopped. "Why do you ask?" "Because people who think as clearly as you do usually can't help but put those thoughts on paper. It would be a waste otherwise. And if I said yes, then I would ask if you publish." The hallway seemed to shrink. She could smell him now, a scent like old parchment and night air, and something else, something wild she couldn't name. "I keep a journal," she said carefully. "Private thoughts, nothing more." It was a lie. She saw in his eyes that he knew it was a lie. "A pity," mate said. "The world could use more voices like yours." He bowed and turned to leave. "Your Grace," she called after him. He paused, looking back. "Do you write?" His smile returned, sharp as a blade. "Every night," he said. "It helps pass the time." Then he was gone, and Isolde was left alone with the terrible, thrilling certainty that everything had just changed. The invitation to Lord Westbrook's country house arrived the following morning. It promised 2 weeks of refined, company-stimulating conversation and all the comforts his estate could provide. Spring was at its height in Kent. The gardens would be magnificent. Cordelia read the invitation with mounting excitement. "Oh, Izzy, we must go. Everyone will be there." "Everyone?" Isolde asked, though she already knew the answer her heart was hoping for. "Lord Pembroke, the Ashfords, Dr. Hughes and his wife, and—" Cordelia checked the list. "The Duke of Ravenshire has accepted, though Westbrook notes that his grace requires accommodations with northern exposures due to a sensitivity to sunlight." Of course he did. Isolde carried the invitation to her writing desk and stared at it. 2 weeks in the country with Caspian, Nightborn. 2 weeks of conversations that might confirm or deny her suspicions. It was dangerous. It was necessary. "We'll go," she said. Cordelia squealed with delight. Isolde remained at her desk, pulling out the latest issue of the Examiner. RM's response to her last essay was, "They're taking up 3 full columns." She read it twice, paying attention not just to the arguments, but to the rhythm of the sentences, the choice of words, the subtle humor that laced through the serious points. Then she pulled out a blank sheet of paper and began drafting her reply. If Caspian Nightborn was RM, she would know by the end of the house party. And if her intellectual partner of 2 years was also this dangerous, beautiful stranger, then she would have to decide what frightened her more, the truth she had been hiding or the truth she might be falling toward. She signed it as always Candidus, truth-teller, liar, both at once. Westbrook Manor rose from the Kent countryside like something from a fever dream. All honey-colored stone and climbing roses with gardens that sprawled toward ancient woods and a lake that mirrored the sky. Isolde and Cordelia arrived on a Thursday afternoon when the light was thick as honey and the air smelled of cut grass and early lavender. "It's perfect," Cordelia breathed. Isolde felt less certain. Perfection always came at a cost. The other guests were already assembled in the drawing room when they entered. Lord Pembroke held court near the windows. The Ashfords clustered around the tea service. Dr. Hughes was deep in conversation with the woman Isolde didn't recognize, sharp-featured and elegant in deep green silk. And there, separate from all of them, standing in shadow near the far wall, was Caspian, Nightborn. He looked up as they entered. Their eyes met across the room, and Isolde felt that same shock of recognition, that sense of something clicking into place. Lady Westbrook materialized at Isolde's elbow. "Lady Isolde, Miss Cordelia, how delightful. You must meet everyone. Though I suspect you already know most. But perhaps not Lady Rowena Blackwell. She's only recently returned from the continent." The woman in green turned, and Isolde found herself being assessed by eyes that missed nothing. Lady Isolde, Rowena said, her voice carrying the faint rasp of smoke and expensive wine. I've heard such fascinating things about you. They say you're quite the blue stocking. It was not a compliment. I enjoy reading, Isolde said carefully. How quaint. Rowena's smile was all teeth. I find real conversation so much more stimulating than books. Don't you, Your Grace? She had turned to address Caspian, who had materialized at the edge of their group with the silent speed of smoke. That depends entirely on the book, he said, and the conversation. Surely you don't prefer the company of dead philosophers to living ladies. The dead philosophers tend to make more sense. Isolde choked on a laugh. Rowena's smile tightened. Perhaps, Rowena said, recovering smoothly, that's because you haven't conversed with the right ladies. I do hope you'll join us for cards this evening, Your Grace. I'm told many things, Caspian said. Most of them are false. He bowed and moved away, leaving Rowena staring after him with an expression Isolde couldn't quite read. Frustration, yes, but something else beneath it, something calculating. That, Cordelia whispered as they climbed the stairs to their rooms, was uncomfortable. That, Isolde corrected, was a woman marking her territory. Their rooms were connected by a shared sitting area, all cream and gold and flooded with afternoon light. Cordelia immediately went to the window. Isolde unpacked her books, her writing materials, the small bottle of ink she never traveled without. She had brought her mother's journal. She didn't know why. Some instinct that said she might need the reminder of what happened when a brilliant woman let herself disappear. That evening, dinner was a formal affair. 18 courses, 3 wines, and conversation that sparkled with the brittle brightness of people trying too hard to appear clever. Isolde was seated between Dr. Hughes and Mr. Ashford, neither of whom acknowledged her except to ask her to pass the salt. Across the table, Rowena held court, directing her conversation almost exclusively toward Caspian. Isolde watched him, couldn't help watching him. He barely touched his food, she noticed. Moved the courses around his plate with perfect manners, but consumed almost nothing. After dinner, they gathered in the music room. Cordelia was persuaded to play, and she did so beautifully, her fingers drawing something achingly lovely from the piano. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. Exquisite, Rowena declared, though I confess I prefer more modern compositions. The old pieces feel so constrained. Constraint is what makes form beautiful, Caspian said from his position by the window. Without boundaries, there is no art, only chaos. How terribly philosophical, Your Grace. Do you apply that theory to all aspects of life? To the ones that matter. Their eyes locked. Tension crackled through the air. Rowena smiled. How fascinating. We must discuss your theories at length. Perhaps tomorrow. Perhaps. Isolde felt something twist in her chest. Foolish, she told herself. You barely know him. You have no claim. But her heart had not received that particular memo. The party broke up late. Cordelia went to bed humming. Isolde went to her room but found sleep impossible. Her mind raced with questions, suspicions, and the echo of Caspian's voice saying, "Constraint is what makes form beautiful." RM had written almost those exact words in an essay 6 months ago. She needed to know, needed to be certain. So when the house finally fell silent and the clock chimed midnight, Isolde wrapped herself in a dark cloak, slipped from her room, and went to find him. The conservatory was attached to the east wing, accessible through a servant's corridor. Isolde moved through sleeping halls like a ghost, her heart hammering. She had no plan, no speech prepared, only the desperate need to stand before him and ask, "Are you RM? Have we been speaking to each other all this time?" The conservatory doors were unlocked. She stepped inside and stopped, breath-catching. Glass walls stretched toward a sky scattered with stars. Orange trees grew in enormous pots, their blossoms filling the air with scent so thick she could taste it. Candles burned in iron holders, their flames reflected infinitely in the glass. And there, standing among the orange trees with his hands clasped behind his back, was Caspian, Nightborn. He turned as she entered. No surprise crossed his face. He had known she would come. "Lady Isolde," he said quietly, "I was hoping you might find your way here." She moved toward him, her cloak whispering across the floor. "You knew I would come." "I suspected. You have questions. So do I." "What questions could you possibly have about me?" He smiled, sad and knowing. "So many, but they all reduced to one. Why do you hide?" The world tilted. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't you?" He moved closer. "You speak brilliantly but quietly. You make arguments that could change minds but deliver them as suggestions. You write essays that shake the foundations of accepted thought, but you sign them with a lie. Her breath stopped. How did you? I know your mind is old. I have been arguing with it for 2 years. There it was, the truth she had suspected. You're RM, she whispered. I am. But you're also a duke. Why would you need to hide? His expression shifted, something dark moving behind his eyes. Because I am hiding something far more dangerous than unconventional opinions. What? He reached up and she saw his hand was shaking. If I tell you, he said, everything changes. You will not be able to unknow it. And you may decide quite reasonably that I am a monster. She should have stepped back. Instead, she stepped closer. I have spent my entire life being told what I am, she said, what I should be, what I'm capable of. And I have spent 2 years arguing with someone who saw past all of that to the mind beneath. If that mind belongs to you, then I want to know you. All of you. Even the parts you think are monstrous. He closed his eyes, and then the words escaped her like prisoners long held. I've never been kissed, sir. Her voice did not waver even as heat flooded her cheeks. I've never been kissed because I have watched what it costs a woman to let someone that close. I watched my mother disappear into my father's shadow. Watched her silence herself. Her brilliance, everything that made her who she was. She died, still silent. And I vowed I would never. Her voice broke. Caspian's eyes opened, and in them she saw something she had never expected to find. Understanding. I lost someone too, he said quietly. Her name was Caroline. She was human, brilliant, brave. And they killed her for loving me. He paused, and when he continued, his voice was barely a whisper. 600 years ago. Isolde stared at him. 600 years, killed her, the pieces fell into place. What are you? She whispered. He took a breath he didn't need, made the choice that would alter both their futures, and told her the truth. I am the Vampire King, Caspian said. I was transformed in the year 965. I have ruled the darkness for 850 years. And against every law of my kind, every lesson written in blood and loss, I have fallen in love with your mind, your courage, your refusal to disappear. He paused. I have fallen in love with you. The conservatory held its breath. The candles burned. The orange blossoms perfumed the air like a promise or a warning. And Isolde Greymark felt the walls she had spent 25 years building begin to crack. Not break, not yet, but crack. Enough to let in light. Enough to let in truth, enough to let in the terrible, exhilarating possibility that maybe love did not have to mean disappearing. Maybe it could mean being seen. Show me, she said, and he did. Caspian Nightborn had lived 850 years. He had seen empires rise and crumble, watched the Black Death consume cities, survive wars that history books barely remembered. But he had never been more afraid than he was in this moment, preparing to show Isolde the truth. Step back, he said quietly. Please. She did 3 steps, her eyes never leaving his face. He closed his eyes and stopped pretending. The change was subtle at first, a stillness that went beyond mere quiet. His chest ceased its false rhythm of breath. The carefully maintained warmth of his skin cooled, and when he opened his eyes again, they burned gold lit from within. Isolde's hand went to her throat. I am not breathing, he said, and his voice carried differently now, resonant in ways human vocal cords could never achieve. I have not breathed since the year 965. I have not needed food or sleep or any of the small mercies that make human life bearable. He moved then, and the movement was wrong. Too fast, impossibly smooth. One moment among the orange trees, the next beside the far wall 30 feet away, without having crossed the space between. Isolde gasped. I am stronger than 10 men, he continued. I can hear your heartbeat from across this room. I can smell the lavender soap you used this morning, the ink on your fingers, and beneath it all the scent of your blood. His voice roughened on the last word. I have killed to survive. Not humans, not for 300 years, but I have taken life. Animal blood sustains me now, but the hunger is always there. And when I am close to you, every instinct I possess screams that you are prey. Silence filled the conservatory. But you don't, Isolde said. Her voice shook, but she had not run. You resist. Yes. Why? He met her eyes again. Because I learned 600 years too late that taking what we want destroys what we need. When the Vampire High Council killed Caroline, they taught me that lesson. She was human, brilliant, brave, and they executed her for the crime of loving me, for making me weak. His hands clenched. It worked. I have been alone ever since, ruling from the shadows, keeping my kind in line, making certain we do not prey on humans indiscriminately, building a kingdom in darkness because light had become unbearable. Until, until I read an essay in the Examiner that made me feel something other than hollow. Until I found myself arguing with Candidus every week, looking forward to it like a man dying of thirst looks toward water. Until I walked into Pembroke's salon and saw you and knew I had already been in love with your mind for 2 years. Isolde pressed her hand against the glass wall. This is impossible, she whispered. Yes. You're a monster from children's stories. Yes. You've killed. Yes. She looked at him for a long moment. Then, are you RM? The question was so unexpected, so perfectly Isolde, that Caspian laughed. The sound was rusty. Yes, he said. Every essay, every rebuttal, every argument, all of it was mine. The one about women's education, 3 months ago. I've read your response 23 times. Something shifted in her expression. Fear remained, but curiosity had joined it. Show me again, she said. The speed. So he did. He moved through the conservatory like wind touching the far wall, the ceiling, the top of an orange tree, returning to stand before her in the space of a heartbeat. When he stopped, she was smiling. Not afraid. Smiling. That's extraordinary, she breathed. That's unnatural. So is genius. So is perfect pitch. She stepped closer. You said your kind has laws, that the council killed Caroline for breaking them. What law did she break? She loved me. I loved her. That was enough. And now if they discover I have feelings for a human woman again, they will kill you, and they will strip me of my crown and leave me to face eternity powerless and alone. And then we should be very careful, Isolde said quietly, that they never find out. Caspian stared at her. You're not running. No. You should be. Probably. She moved closer still. I've spent my entire life being careful, being quiet, hiding who I am. You have done the same. We are both pretending to be less than we are. She reached up, her hand shaking, and pressed it against his chest. I felt more alive arguing with RM than I have ever felt in any ballroom or salon. If that mind belongs to you to this, then I want to know it, even if it's dangerous. You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. For the first time in my life, I know exactly what I want. Caspian caught her hand. I could hurt you. If I lose control, then don't lose control. They stood frozen, her hand trapped between his, the scent of orange blossoms wrapping around them. Every instinct screamed at him to refuse, to walk away, to protect her from himself. But 850 years of loneliness crumbled beneath her words. He leaned down slowly, giving her every chance to change her mind. She didn't. Their lips met, soft and careful and achingly tentative. For 3 heartbeats, it was perfect. Isolde's mouth warmed beneath his, her hand still pressed against his chest. Then the hunger surged. Caspian felt his fangs extend, sharp and sudden. He tasted blood where his fang had caught his own lip, and the copper sweetness mixed with Isolde's scent made the world narrow to red, in need, and now. He jerked back so hard he nearly fell. Isolde stood frozen, her fingers touching her lips. I'm sorry, Caspian gasped. The fangs were still extended. I'm sorry, I should never have. Your eyes, she whispered. They're completely gold. You need to leave now, please. Caspian, now! The word came out as a growl, inhuman and terrible. Isolde fled. He heard her footsteps retreating, heard the distant slam of a door, and only then did he allow himself to collapse. His hands were shaking. His fangs retracted slowly, painfully. And in the silence of the conservatory, Caspian Nightborn realized he had just made the same mistake that had cost him everything 600 years ago. He had let himself feel. Isolde made it to her room before the tears came. She locked the door, pressed her back against it, and slid down until she was sitting on the floor with her knees drawn up and her heart trying to beat its way out of her chest. A vampire. The Vampire King. 850 years old. And she had kissed him. Wanted to kiss him again. Was that madness normal women did not learn? That the man they were falling for was an immortal monster and then feel disappointed that the kiss had ended. But then she had never been a normal woman. She pulled herself up and moved to her writing desk. Her hands were still shaking, but the pen could steady them. She pulled out paper and began to write. He is a vampire. He drinks blood. He is killed. These are facts. He is also RM. He writes brilliantly. He sees me in ways no one ever has. These are also facts. The question is, which facts matter more? She wrote until her hand cramped, wrote until the sky began to lighten. Then she hid the pages, washed her face, and prepared to face another day of pretending everything was normal. Cordelia found her at breakfast. "You look terrible," her sister said bluntly. "Did you sleep at all?" "No." "Are you ill?" "No." "Then what?" Cordelia stopped, leaned closer. "Izzy, you went somewhere last night." "I needed air." "For 3 hours." Isolde said nothing. Cordelia's eyes widened. "You met him, the Duke." "Delia, what happened? Did he hurt you?" "No, he would never." The certainty in her own voice surprised her, but it was true. Caspian would tear himself apart before he would willingly harm her. "Then what?" Cordelia pressed. Isolde looked at her sister, sweet Cordelia, who still believed the world was fundamentally safe, that people were what they seemed. "How could she possibly explain he has secrets?" Isolde said finally. "Dangerous ones. And I am trying to decide if knowing them makes me brave or foolish." "Do you care for him?" Isolde closed her eyes. "Yes. God help me, yes." Cordelia reached across the table and took her hand. "Then be brave. Mother was never brave and it killed her. Don't make the same mistake." The words struck like a bell. Isolde squeezed her sister's hand and made a decision. She would learn everything about vampires, about Caspian's past. She would research until she understood exactly what she was walking into. And then she would decide, not from fear, but from knowledge, the way she made every important choice. The library at Westbrook Manor was extensive. Lord Westbrook himself pointed Isolde toward the hidden collection. "My grandfather," he explained, walking her down a narrow corridor, "was something of an occultist, collected all manner of strange volumes. Most of it nonsense, of course, but fascinating nonsense." He unlocked a door that led to a small, dusty room lined with books that smelled of leather and secrets. "Help yourself, though I can't imagine what a lady of your education wants with medieval bestiaries and folklore." "Research," Isolde said, "for an essay." He left her there. It took 2 hours to find what she was looking for, a volume bound in cracked leather, De Natura Vampiris, The Nature of Vampires. She carried it to a chair near the window and began to read. The text was Latin. Isolde translated slowly, piecing together a picture of what Caspian was, what he had been. Vampires were made, not born, a human transformed through the exchange of blood, dying and rising as something other. They could not walk in sunlight, could not cross running water, required blood to survive, though animal blood could sustain them if human was denied. They were immortal, ageless, impossibly strong and fast, and they were ruled by a hierarchy as rigid as any human court. At the top sat the vampire king, the oldest and most powerful, whose word was law, Caspian. There were rules, laws written in blood over centuries, and one law appeared again and again: no vampire shall bond with a human. The bloodline must remain pure. Those who violated the law faced execution, both the vampire and the human. Isolde set the book down with shaking hands. Caroline had not simply died. She had been executed for the crime of loving Caspian. And if the council discovered that Caspian was developing feelings for another human woman, they would do the same to her. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt a cold, clear fury begin to build, a law that demanded loneliness, a law that punished love, a law that existed solely to maintain power. She had spent 2 years writing essays about unjust laws. This was no different, and she would be damned if she let fear dictate her choices. She was still reading when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned, expecting Westbrook. Instead, she found herself face to face with a man she had never seen before. He was tall, dark-haired, with features that were almost as perfect as Caspian's. Almost. There was something cruel in the set of his mouth, something cold in his eyes that were the color of old amber. "Lady Isolde," he said, and his voice carried the same inhuman resonance she had heard in Caspian's. "How industrious of you. Reading about my kind." Every instinct screamed danger. "Who are you?" "Theron, I am second to the king, his most trusted advisor." The smile that crossed his face did not reach his eyes. "Or I was until he became distracted." Isolde stood slowly. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't you? The king has been behaving strangely for weeks now. And now I find you a human woman reading vampire lore in a manner where the king just happens to be staying." He moved closer. "The king is weak. He has been weak since Caroline. And weakness in a king endangers us all." He leaned close. "You seem like an intelligent woman, Lady Isolde. So let me be clear. Stay away from Caspian Nightborn. Because if the council learns of his interest in you, they will kill you both. And I will not lift a finger to stop them." He left as silently as he had come. Isolde stood alone, the book still clutched in her hands, and realized that the danger came not only from some distant vampire council. It came from within Caspian's own court. She found him that night in the gardens. He stood beneath an ancient oak, staring up at the moon. When he heard her approach, he went very still. "You should not be here," he said without turning. "I met Theron today." Caspian turned sharply. "What did he say to you?" "That you're weak, that your interest in me endangers your people." Silence stretched between them. "Is he right?" Isolde asked. Caspian's shoulders sagged. "He is right that I am putting you in danger. The council they gave Caroline and me a choice 600 years ago. Abdicate and be exiled, powerless, hunted. Or I remain king and watch her die. What did you choose?" "I tried to find a third option. I argued, begged. And while I argued, they grew tired of waiting. They staked her through the heart before I could even finish speaking." His voice broke. "Then they asked me again, 'Will you abdicate or will you rule?' I said I would rule. Because Caroline was already dead and letting them destroy everything would not bring her back. I became what they needed me to be. Cold, distant. I have spent 600 years proving I learned my lesson. But you never forgave them." "No." Isolde moved closer. "Theron thinks you're weak. I think he's afraid that a king who can love might also be able to change. To challenge laws that serve only to maintain power." Caspian stared at her. "You've been thinking about this." "I've been thinking about nothing else." She pulled the book from beneath her cloak. "I've been reading about your kind, about the laws." "Then you know it's hopeless." "I know that every unjust system appears hopeless until someone is brave enough to challenge it." She moved closer still. "You asked me once why I hide. The answer is the same reason you've spent 600 years pretending not to feel. Because the world is cruel to those who dare to be different." She reached for his hand. "But I am done hiding. I am done letting fear dictate my choices. And if you truly love me, then you need to decide. Or are you going to spend eternity alone because you're afraid? Or are you going to fight for something worth having?" Caspian looked down at their joined hands. "If I fight, they will kill you. If you don't fight, I will have wasted my entire life being safe. And I would rather die having lived than survive having hidden." He pulled her into his arms. "You are the bravest person I have ever met. Braver than any warrior, any king, any vampire who has walked this earth. And I do not deserve you." "No," Isolde agreed. "But you're going to try anyway." He laughed, the sound wet and broken and human. And in the darkness beneath the oak tree, they made a plan. They would be careful. They would hide their connection from Theron and the council. They would continue to argue in print to maintain the appearance of intellectual rivalry. And when the time was right, Isolde would publish an essay that would shake the foundations of both human and vampire society. An essay about love, about laws designed to control rather than protect, about the fundamental right of all thinking beings to choose their own futures. She would sign it Candidus. And Caspian would write the rebuttal that would support her arguments while appearing to oppose them. They would change the world together. It was a beautiful plan. It lasted exactly 8 days. Rowena Blackwell had not survived 28 years without learning to recognize opportunity. And watching Caspian Nightborn slip into the gardens night after night, seeing the way he looked at Lady Isolde when he thought no one was watching, that was opportunity. Rowena's father had been a vampire hunter. Not a successful one. He had died when Rowena was 14, killed by a vampire he had tracked to London. But he had left behind journals, maps, contacts within the Hunters Guild, and one very specific piece of information: the Duke of Ravenshire was not human. Rowena had carried that knowledge for 10 years, waiting for the right moment. Wealth could be found anywhere. Power was rarer. If she could make Caspian need her, she could secure herself a future beyond her wildest dreams. All she needed was leverage. She found it on the 9th night of the house party. Cordelia was in the music room practicing. Rowena had made a point of befriending the girl. "Your sister seems quite taken with the Duke," Rowena said casually. Cordelia missed a note. "I don't know what you mean." "Come now, I've seen the way she looks at him. They're both scholars. They have much to discuss." "Is that what we're calling it?" Rowena smiled. "How romantic. A meeting of minds." Cordelia stopped playing. "Lady Rowena, I must ask you not to spread rumors about my sister. I only mention it because I would hate to see her hurt. The Duke is not what he seems." "What do you mean?" Rowena leaned close. "My father studied men like Caspian Nightborn, men who never appear during the day, who never eat, who have lived for impossibly long periods. There are explanations for such anomalies. Unpleasant ones. Cordelia's face had gone pale. You're suggesting that's absurd. Are they? Then why does the Duke require northern-facing rooms? Why has no one ever seen him in sunlight? Stop. I'm only trying to protect your sister. My sister is the most intelligent woman I know. If there were anything to fear, she would see it. Cordelia stood abruptly. This conversation is over. She fled the room, but the seed had been planted, and Rowena began to make plans. The message reached the Vampire High Council 3 days later. It was delivered by Theron, who had spent the past week watching his king fall deeper into the same trap that had destroyed him centuries before. Theron had served Caspian for 400 years, had stood beside him through wars and plagues in the long cold centuries after Caroline's death, had watched his king become the perfect ruler, cold just utterly devoted to their people. And now he was watching that perfect king crumble. For a human woman who wrote essays, it was unbearable. So Theron wrote to the council and he told them everything. About Isolde Greymark, about the intellectual connection, about the late-night meetings, about how history was repeating itself. The council's response was swift. They would attend the upcoming Harrington Ball in London. They would see this woman for themselves. And if the situation was as serious as Theron suggested, they would handle it the way they had handled Caroline. Permanently. Theron sealed the letter and felt nothing but relief. He was saving his king. Even if Caspian cursed his name for centuries to come, this was mercy. Better to cut out the infection before it could spread. The invitation to the Harrington Ball arrived on a Tuesday morning. Isolde read it twice. 3 weeks from now, London's grandest social event of the season. 500 guests. The kind of ball where reputations were made or destroyed. Cordelia was ecstatic. Oh, Izzy, this is perfect. If I'm seen at the Harrington Ball, my debut is practically guaranteed success. Isolde forced a smile. Then we'll go. That evening she met Caspian in their usual place, a section of the gardens, hidden behind overgrown hedges. We received the invitation, she said. As did I. He was pacing. Isolde, I need to tell you something. Theron has been watching us. I can feel his attention. He's planning something. Can you control him? In theory. In practice, Theron has connections within the council that predate my reign. If he wanted to move against me, he has the power. Isolde felt cold. What would he do? Expose us, force the council to act. They would not give me a choice this time. They would simply eliminate the threat. Me. Yes. She should have been afraid. Instead, she heard herself say, then we need to act first. Caspian stopped pacing. What? At the Harrington Ball, I'm going to reveal myself as Candidas. Publicly. She spoke quickly. I'll give a speech about truth and courage, and you will be there to support me. Isolde, that's madness. I'll be free, she interrupted, and I'll have claimed my voice in front of 500 witnesses. If something happens to me after that, questions will be asked. The spotlight protects as much as it exposes. Caspian stared at her. You've been planning this. I always knew that eventually I would have to choose between safety and truth. I'm choosing truth. He moved to her, cupping her face. You are extraordinary. I'm terrified. Both can be true. He leaned his forehead against hers. I will protect you. Whatever happens at that ball, I will stand between you and anything that tries to harm you. Even your council. Especially them. When they stayed like that, breathing each other's air, holding on to each other, against the storm they could both feel building. Then Cordelia's voice cut through the darkness. Isolde, they sprang apart. Cordelia stood at the hedge entrance, her face pale in the moonlight, her sketchbook clutched to her chest. Delia, Isolde said, what are you doing here? I followed you. I've been following you for 3 nights. Cordelia's voice shook. Lady Rowena said things, terrible things, about vampires, and I thought she was mad, but then I watched you sneak out and I needed to know. Her voice trailed off as she looked at Caspian. He had not moved. His eyes were still gold in the darkness, his stillness, too perfect to be human. Delia, Isolde said carefully, I can explain. He's one of them, isn't he? Cordelia whispered. What Lady Rowena said, it's true. Caspian spoke, then his voice gentle. Yes, Miss Cordelia, I am a vampire. I have been for 850 years, and I give you my word that I would never harm your sister. I would die first. Cordelia looked between them. Izzy, tell me you're not. I love him, Isolde said simply. I know what he is, and I love him anyway. The words hung in the air. Caspian's eyes widened. It was the first time she had said it aloud. Cordelia's face crumpled. This is insane. Izzy, please, you have to stop this before what? Isolde moved toward her sister. Before I choose something for myself, before I decide that my life is worth fighting for, before they kill you. Cordelia was crying. Lady Rowena said there are hunters. If they find out, how does Rowena know about hunters? Caspian's voice had gone very quiet. Cordelia wiped her eyes. Her father. He was one. He died hunting a vampire 10 years ago. Caspian went absolutely still. What was his name? Blackwell. Edmund Blackwell. The silence that followed was terrible. I killed him, Caspian said finally. He found one of my safe houses, killed 3 vampires under my protection. I hunted him in return. Cordelia gasped. I am not proud of it, Caspian continued, but I would do it again. He was a threat to my people. And now his daughter is here, Isolde said slowly. She knows what you are, and she's been asking questions about us. They looked at each other, the realization settling like frost. She's going to expose us, Isolde whispered. Worse, Caspian said. If she has her father's contacts, she's going to bring hunters. And if Theron has contacted the council, they'll be coming too. When the Harrington ball. Cordelia was shaking. What are you going to do? Caspian looked at Isolde. I'm going to leave tonight. I'll disappear before the ball. You'll be safe if I'm not here. No, Isolde said. Isolde, no, I will not let you run. I will not let them win. We go to the Harrington ball exactly as planned. I reveal myself as Candidus. You stand witness, and we dare them to try to silence us. That's suicide. That's courage. When he opened his eyes again, they were burning gold, fierce and ancient and determined. If we do this, he said quietly, I need you to know something. I will not choose my crown over you. Not this time. If it comes to a choice, I will abdicate. I will give up 850 years of power without hesitation. He moved to her, taking both her hands. This is love. This certainty that I would burn the world to keep you safe. You make me feel human again, Isolde, and I will not lose that, even if it costs me everything. Isolde felt tears on her face. Then we fight together. Cordelia made a soft sound, something between a tune and a laugh. You're both insane, she said, absolutely insane, and I'm going to help you. They stared at her. You need allies, Cordelia said firmly. I can't fight vampires or hunters, but I can do something else. I can paint. She held up her sketchbook. I've been drawing everything. I have visual proof of your arguments of the intellectual connection. If you're going to make your stand, you need evidence that you're more than scandal. You would do that, Isolde asked. Risk your reputation. You're my sister, and you're right. About everything, I've been drawing in secret for 3 years because I was afraid. I'm done hiding too. The 3 of them stood together in the midnight garden, and for a moment the future seemed almost possible. Then Rowena Blackwell stepped out from behind the hedges. How touching, she said, and her smile was sharp as broken glass. The vampire, the blue stocking, and the innocent. What a perfect little tragedy. Caspian moved in front of Isolde so fast she didn't see him move. How long have you been listening? Long enough. Rowena held up a small notebook. Long enough to have written down every word. And tomorrow morning this will be delivered to both the Hunters Guild and the Vampire High Council, along with the location and date of the Harrington Ball. Why? Isolde asked. What do you gain at justice? My father died because of him. Now I'll watch him die because of you. Rowena looked at Caspian. 10 years I've waited, and now you've handed me everything I need. She turned to leave. Caspian could have caught her, could have stopped her. But there were witnesses now. Cordelia had seen what he was. Any violence would only confirm Rowena's accusations. So he let her go, and in the silence that followed, Isolde took Caspian's hand and said the only thing that mattered. 3 weeks. We have 3 weeks to prepare. She smiled fierce and bright and utterly unafraid. That's enough time to change everything. 3 weeks was not enough time to change the world, but it was enough time to prepare for battle. Isolde returned to London with Cordelia the day after Rowena's discovery. The house on the edge of Mayfair had never felt smaller, as if the walls themselves were pressing in with the weight of what was coming. She wrote through the nights, a speech, words that would need to carry across a ballroom of 500 people, and convince them that the woman they had dismissed for 25 years was worth listening to. Words that might be the last thing she ever said. Cordelia worked beside her, translating Isolde's arguments into visual form. Sketches became paintings. Side by side, the sisters built an arsenal of truth. and every midnight a shadow would appear at Isolde's window. Caspian came to her each night, climbing impossible walls with impossible grace. They did not kiss again, did not touch more than hands clasped across her desk. But they talked about Caroline, about the 600 years since her death, about the laws that govern vampire society, about what it meant to love something you could lose. The council arrives in London tomorrow, Caspian said on the seventh night. He sat in the shadows, his gold eyes the only color in the darkness. I can feel them, the weight of their attention turning this way. How many of 5? The full council. They have not all gathered in one place for 2 centuries. Isolde's pen stilled. They're taking this seriously. They're terrified. A vampire king who can love is a vampire king who might change, who might decide that our laws need revision. His voice went soft. They will kill you to prevent that. Then we make certain your nature is not what they claim it is. Isolde, listen to me. She set down her pen and moved to kneel before him. You have spent 850 years believing you are a monster. But vulnerability is what makes us brave enough to care about something beyond our own survival. She took his cold hands in her warm ones. When you stood between Caroline and the council, you were not weak. You were outnumbered. And when they killed her, you did not fail her by surviving. You honored her by continuing to protect your people. A sound escaped him, something broken and raw. He pulled Isolde into his arms. I cannot lose you, he whispered. Not again. Then we fight for a world where you don't have to choose between love and duty. He pulled back enough to look at her. You make it sound possible. Everything impossible becomes possible the moment someone is brave enough to try. They stayed like that until dawn, until Caspian had to slip away before the sun. And when he was gone, Isolde returned to her desk and continued writing. The speech that would either save them or destroy them both. The Hunters Guild received Rowena's letter on the 10th day. Commander Marcus Vane read it twice. The letter was detailed, precise. It identified the target as Caspian Nightborn, Duke of Ravenshire, the vampire king himself. Vane had been hunting vampires for 40 years, had staked 17 of them personally, but he had never hunted a vampire king before. He called a gathering of the guild's inner circle. 12 hunters. They met in a basement beneath a church surrounded by silver weapons and holy water. The Harrington Ball, Vane said, spreading the letter across the table. The vampire will be there, vulnerable, distracted. We could strike before then, Hunter suggested. No, his estate will be fortified. At the ball he will be exposed. And the woman, this Lady Isolde Greymark, Vane hesitated. We take the vampire. The woman's fate can be decided after. Plans were made. Silver stakes. Holy water. Crossbows loaded with wooden bolts. On the night of the Harrington Ball, they would end the reign of the vampire king. Rowena spent the 3 weeks preparing for her triumph. She had sent letters to both the council and the guild, setting them on a collision course. She ordered a new gown for the ball, crimson silk, the color of blood and revenge. And she ignored the small voice that whispered she was making a mistake. Her father had died badly. She had been 14 when they brought his body home drained of blood. But Rowena had spent 10 years learning that knowledge did not ease grief, and grief left to fester became something darker. She told herself this was justice. She refused to acknowledge it felt more like murder. The night before the ball, Isolde burned her mother's journal. She did it in the fireplace, watching the pages curl and blacken. Cordelia stood beside her, one hand on her sister's shoulder. Are you certain? Cordelia asked. Yes, I know what it says. I know what warning it carries. Isolde watched the last page catch fire. But I will not let her fate become mine. If I'm going to step into that ballroom tomorrow, I need to do it unburdened by ghosts. The journal dissolved into embers. Do you think she would be proud? Cordelia whispered. I think she would be terrified and proud and desperately wishing she had been brave enough to do the same. Cordelia pulled Isolde into a fierce hug. I'm proud of you. Even if tomorrow is a disaster, I need you to know that. I know. And I'll be there on that stage with you. They stood together in front of the dying fire, 2 sisters preparing for war. Neither of them slept that night. The Harrington Ball began at 8 in the evening. Lady Harrington's London mansion blazed with light. 500 guests arrived in carriages that lined the streets for blocks. The orchestra was the finest money could hire. The champagne flowed like water. It was perfect. Excessive. Exactly the kind of event where reputations were forged or shattered. Isolde arrived with Cordelia at 8:30. She wore a gown of deep blue silk that Cordelia had insisted upon, simple and elegant. Her hair was pulled back severely, her only jewelry a pair of pearl earrings that had belonged to her mother. She looked like what she was, a woman preparing to speak truth rather than seduce admirers. "You look beautiful," Cordelia whispered. I looked terrified. That too, but mostly beautiful. The ballroom was a sea of color and noise. Lord Pembroke holding court, the Ashfords dancing, Dr. Hughes examining floral arrangements, and there standing alone near the terrace doors, in a coat so black it seemed to absorb light, was Caspian Nightborn. Their eyes met across the crowded room. He did not smile, did not move, but something in his expression steadied her. For truth, for choice, for the right to love without disappearing. Rowena materialized at Isolde's elbow, bow resplendent in crimson. "Lady Isolde, how brave of you to come, given the circumstances." "What circumstances?" "Oh, you'll see soon enough." She swept away. "I don't like this," Cordelia muttered. "Neither do I, but we're committed now." They found their positions near the edge of the ballroom where Cordelia had arranged for her paintings to be displayed. She had told Lady Harrington they were a gift. Harrington had agreed. The paintings lined the wall, Isolde and Caspian in mid-debate, the salon at Pembroke's, the library at Westbrook, each one capturing not faces but ideas. Several guests had already stopped to examine them. The clock struck 9. The orchestra fell silent. Lady Harrington stepped to the center of the ballroom. "My dear friends, we have a special presentation this evening. Lady Isolde Greymark has requested the floor to make an announcement of some importance." Polite applause, curious faces turning. This was it. Isolde stepped forward, her heart hammering. Cordelia squeezed her hand once, then released her. She walked to the center of the ballroom, 500 faces staring. And in the back near the terrace doors, she saw movement. 5 figures had entered. They wore evening clothes, but there was something wrong about them. Something too still. Their eyes caught the candlelight and reflected it back gold. The Vampire High Council had arrived. Across the room, she saw Caspian stiffen. No turning back now. Isolde took a breath and began. "My lords and ladies," she said, and her voice carried clear and strong, "I stand before you tonight to confess a deception I have maintained for 6 years." The crowd leaned forward. "Many of you read the Examiner. Many of you have debated the essays published under the name Candidatus. Essays about women's education, legal reform, the fundamental rights of all thinking beings." Murmurs rippled through the room. "I am Candidatus." The silence that followed was absolute. Shock registered on face after face. "I wrote under a false name," she continued, "because this room would not have listened to my true one. You have quoted my arguments at your breakfast tables, called them brilliant, necessary, radical. But you would never have done so if you knew they came from a woman standing before you in a gown she cannot afford." Someone gasped. Someone else laughed, brittle and nervous. "I ask you now what changed. The arguments remain the same. The logic is identical. Only the name is different." She paused. "If my words were sound when you thought me a man, they are sound now. Truth does not change based on who speaks it." She gestured to Cordelia's paintings. "My sister has documented my intellectual journey. The conversations, the debates. These are not secrets. They are evidence that brilliant thought can come from unexpected places." Lord Pembroke found his voice. "Lady Isolde, this is highly irregular. Surely you see that claiming authorship of those essays is tantamount to admitting you have been deceiving society?" "I have been surviving it," Isolde interrupted. Her voice had found its strength. "I have been doing what women have always done, hiding my light, so as not to blind men who are comfortable in darkness." The crowd erupted in noise, some shocked, some approving, most stunned. And then Rowena Blackwell stepped forward. "How inspiring! Such bravery!" Her voice dripped venom. "Tell me, is the Duke of Ravenshire equally honest, or does he hide secrets of his own?" Isolde's blood went cold. Rowena turned to address the crowd. "Perhaps we should ask His Grace directly. Your Grace, would you care to join Lady Isolde in her confessions?" All eyes turned to Caspian. He moved forward with inhuman grace, and several people noticed, saw the wrongness of his movement. "Lady Rowena raises an interesting point," Caspian said. "She wishes to expose secrets." "Very well." He looked directly at Isolde. Something passed between them. A question, an answer. Together. "I am Arm," Caspian said. "I have been Lady Isolde's intellectual sparring partner for 2 years. We have argued philosophy and politics without ever meeting face to face. Until we did. and I discovered that the mind I admired belonged to a woman whose courage puts my own to shame. The ballroom was absolutely silent. And I am a vampire. Chaos exploded, screaming, shoving, people trying to flee while others surged forward in horrified fascination. The orchestra dropped their instruments with crashes. Caspian's eyes blazed full gold. His fangs extended visible, even from a distance. I am 850 years old, he continued over the noise. I am the Vampire King, and I have spent 6 centuries enforcing laws designed to keep my kind separate from yours. Laws that demand isolation, that punish connection, that treat love as weakness. He turned to face the 5 figures in the back, the Vampire High Council, and I am done obeying them. The eldest of the council stepped forward. His name was Lucien, and he had walked the earth for over 1,000 years. When he spoke, the noise quieted. Caspian Nightborn, you stand in violation of our most sacred law. You have formed an attachment to a human. The penalty is death for both of you. No, the word came from the terrace entrance. Commander Vane stood there flanked by 12 hunters, armed with crossbows and silver stakes. Holy water dripped from blessed weapons. The penalty is justice, Vane said. For centuries your kind has preyed upon ours. Tonight that ends, starting with you, monster. Isolde found herself standing between 3 forces, the council behind her, hunters in front, and 500 terrified humans on every side. And in the center of it all, Caspian. Stop, she said. Every eye turned to her. Just stop. She moved to stand beside Caspian. All of you, you claim to serve justice to protect your people. But what you actually serve is fear. She addressed the council. You made laws to prevent connection because connection makes vampires care about something beyond survival. And beings who care can be reasoned with, made to change. Then to the hunters. And you hunt monsters because it's easier than admitting that monstrosity is not determined by species. That the real enemy is not what we are, but what we choose to do. She turned last to the crowd. And you enforce social laws that silence half the population because brilliance in women threatens men who have built their power on being the only voices in the room. You call it propriety, the natural order, but it is just fear wearing a prettier name. Her voice rose, filling the ballroom. I have spent 25 years being afraid of disappearing into marriage like my mother did, afraid of choosing love because I watched what it cost her. She reached for Caspian's hand. It was cold as marble, but when her warmth touched it, she felt him shudder. But I am done being afraid. I claim my voice. I claim my work. I claim the right to love a man who sees my mind before my gender, who has spent 800 years alone because he was taught that love makes you weak. She looked up at Caspian. It doesn't make you weak. It makes you worth knowing. Tears were streaming down her face now. So do what you will. Kill us if you must. But know that every person in this room will remember what you were so afraid of. 2 people standing together. A vampire and a human. A king and a scholar. 2 minds who found each other and refused to be separated by laws designed to keep us apart. She turned back to the crowd, and they will ask themselves, if this was so dangerous, so threatening, so worth destroying, why were they so desperate to stop it? Silence. Then from the back of the room, a single voice. I believe her. Cordelia stepped forward, her paintings gathered in her arms. I have watched my sister hide her brilliance for years. I have watched her diminish herself. And I am done watching. She set the paintings down and moved to stand beside Isolde. If you kill her, you kill me too. Because I will not live in a world that punishes honesty. Another voice joined hers. Nor I. Dr. Hughes stepped out from the crowd. I have read Candidus for 2 years. Those essays changed the way I practice medicine. If Lady Isolde wrote them, then Lady Isolde is a genius, and I will not stand by while genius is destroyed. One by one, others stepped forward. Not everyone, not even most, but enough. A young woman who had attended Isolde's salons, an elderly gentleman who had quoted Candidus in Parliament, a mother who had taught her daughters using the essays. They formed a wall of bodies between the hunters and the vampires. Commander Vane looked at the crowd, then at his weapons, then back at Isolde and Caspian. This changes nothing, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. It changes everything, Isolde replied. You cannot kill someone in front of 50 witnesses who will testify to murder. Vane's jaw tightened. For a long moment, he struggled with himself. Then he lowered his crossbow. One chance, he said to Caspian. Prove you're different from the monsters I've spent my life hunting. Caspian met his eyes. I choose it every day. Every moment, every time I look at her and feel human again. Vane nodded slowly. Then he turned to his hunters. We leave. But I will be watching. If you hurt anyone, if you break this fragile peace, I will hunt you to the ends of the earth. The hunters retreated. That left only the council. Lucian moved forward until he stood face to face with Caspian. Ancient eyes met ancient eyes. You cannot love her and remain king, Lucian said quietly. The law is absolute. Choose. Caspian didn't hesitate. I abdicate. The word fell like a stone. I abdicate my crown, my throne, and my authority. I renounce my claim to rule, and I claim instead the right to be simply Caspian, a vampire who has chosen to stop hiding from the only thing that ever made 800 years bearable. He looked at Isolde. I choose her. Lucian's expression was unreadable. You understand what this means. Without the crown, you lose immortality's protection. Within months, the centuries will catch up to you. You will age, weaken, die. I know. You would trade eternity for perhaps 50 mortal years with this woman. I would trade eternity for one honest moment. Silence stretched between them. Then Lucien did something no one expected. He smiled. Good, he said. Caspian stared. What? We needed to know if you meant it, if you would truly choose love over power. Lucien gestured to the other council members. Caroline's death was a mistake. We were young then, afraid of change. We thought control was the same as leadership. We were wrong. He looked at the crowd, at the humans still forming a protective wall. This, he said, is what we feared. Connection. Alliance. The moment when humans and vampires stand together. Because once that happens, we cannot go back to being separate. We must learn to coexist. He turned back to Caspian. Keep your crown, but change the laws. Make room for this. He gestured to Isolde. Because if a vampire king can love and remain strong, perhaps the rest of us can learn to be less alone. Caspian's expression was pure shock. You're allowing this. We're encouraging it, with conditions. Lucien's voice hardened. The humans must accept us, not hunt us, not fear us, but see us as beings trying to survive. Isolde stepped forward. I will write essays, make arguments, give speeches. I will use every tool I have to convince humans that vampires deserve the same rights we claim for ourselves. And if you fail, then we will have tried, which is more than anyone has done in 1,000 years. Lucian studied her for a long moment. Then he inclined his head, a gesture of respect between equals. Very well, the law has changed. Vampires may form attachments with humans, provided both consent and the relationship remains public. Secrecy breeds suspicion. Honesty builds trust. He looked at Caspian. You remain king, but you are now responsible for building a bridge between our worlds. Caspian pulled Isolde against his side. I know, but I won't be doing it alone. Lucian nodded, then he and the council turned and left. The ballroom remained frozen. Then Lady Harrington began to clap. Slowly, hesitantly, others joined. Not everyone, not even half, but enough to matter. They found each other on the terrace later when the ball had dissolved into chaos and speculation. The night air was cool, the stars were scattered like diamonds, and Isolde Greymark stood at the balustrade, trying to believe what had just happened. Caspian materialized beside her. We did it, he said, and his voice carried wonder. We survived it, she corrected. The real work starts tomorrow. Yes, he took her hand. Isolde, I need to ask you something. She turned to face him. I am still vampire, still immortal. You are human, mortal. In 60 years, perhaps 70, you will die, and I will have to watch it happen. His voice broke. I cannot turn you without your consent. I will not take your mortality without permission, but I need you to understand what choosing me means. Isolde was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, ask me again in 60 years. What? Ask me again when I'm old, when I've lived a full human life, when I've written everything I want to write, taught everyone I can teach, when I've watched Cordelia grow old with her own family, when I've been fully, completely human. She cupped his face in her hands. Then when I've experienced everything mortality has to offer, then ask me if I want to do it all again, if I want to trade the peace of death for centuries more with you. Tears ran down Caspian's face, red tears, blood-tinged and terrible and beautiful. And what if you say no? Then you will let me go with grace, and you will remember me. I don't want anyone else. You said the same thing about Carolyn. 600 years later, you found me. She smiled through her own tears. I'm not asking you to stop living when I stop breathing. I'm asking you to honor what we have now, for however long we have it. Caspian kissed her then properly this time without fear or hunger. Just love. When they finally pulled apart, Isolde was breathless. Was that your first real kiss? Caspian asked. Yes. How was it? She pretended to consider. Adequate. Could use work. Perhaps we should practice. His laugh was surprised and perfect. Perhaps we should. And somewhere in the ballroom behind them, London society tried to make sense of what had just happened. But Isolde and Caspian were done caring what London thought. They had found something rarer than acceptance. They had found each other. The lecture hall was packed with students, human and vampire, both sitting side by side. Isolde Greymark stood at the podium. She was 75 now, her hair silver, her hands marked by decades of holding pens. She moved slower than she once had, spoke, with a voice that sometimes trembled. But her mind was as sharp as ever. She finished her lecture and opened the floor to questions. A young vampire woman raised her hand. Professor Greymark, is it true you were never turned, that you chose to remain human? Yes. Only white Isolde smiled. Because mortality teaches lessons that immortality cannot. It teaches urgency, priority, the value of time when you know it's limited. I wanted to experience all of that before I made the choice to let it go. And will you let it go? I don't know yet. Ask me tomorrow. The class laughed. After the lecture, Caspian met her outside. He looked exactly as he had 50 years ago. But the way he looked at her had deepened, enriched with decades of shared mornings and midnight conversations. Still brilliant, he said, offering his arm. Still flattering, she replied, taking it. They walked home through streets that had changed dramatically since the night of the Harrington Ball. Vampire-owned businesses stood beside human ones. Mixed couples walked openly. Children adopted by vampire-human partnerships played in parks. It was not perfect. There were still those who hated, who feared. But it was better, and better was enough. That night in their library, surrounded by books they had written together, and separately, Isolde sat in her favorite chair and Caspian sat at her feet. I have a question, he said quietly. She knew what he was going to ask, had known for months now. Ask me. Will you let me turn you when the time comes? Will you choose to stay? Isolde was quiet for a long moment, considering. She had lived fully, loved deeply, written everything she needed to write, taught generations of students, watched Cordelia raise children and grandchildren who knew to value brilliance over silence. She had been Candidas, had claimed her voice, had made her mark on the world. And now at 75, she had earned the right to make one final choice. Yes, she said, when the time comes, but not yet. When I've finished the book I'm writing, when I've taught my last class, when I've said goodbye to everyone who needs to hear it. She reached down and took his hand. When I'm ready to start again, to be young again, to have centuries ahead instead of years. You're certain. I'm terrified, but I'm also certain. There's still so much I want to argue with you about, so many essays to write, so many minds to change. She smiled. I'm not done yet. Not with you, not with this work, not with life. Even if it means becoming what I am. Especially then, because I will bring my humanity with me, my memories, my understanding of what it means to live and choose to live again. And perhaps that perspective is what vampire society needs. A queen who remembers being mortal. Caspian's eyes went wide. Queen? Well, yes. If you're the king and I'm your partner, doesn't that make me queen? I suppose it does. Then I accept. Provisionally. Subject to negotiation of terms. He laughed. You would negotiate the terms of immortality. I would negotiate anything. It's what I do. He pulled her into his arms, careful of her fragile bones. I love you, he whispered into her silver hair. I have loved you for 50 years. I will love you for 50 more, for 500 more, for however long you'll let me. Then you'd better prepare for a very long argument, Isolde murmured, because I have a lot of opinions about how to run a vampire kingdom, and I intend to share every single one. I wouldn't have it any other way. They sat like that as the candles burned low and the night deepened. Two people who had found each other across impossible divides. A vampire king who had learned that love was not weakness, but strength. A human woman who had refused to disappear. And together they had built something that would outlast them both. A legacy of truth, of courage. of choosing to be seen, to be known, to be vulnerable in a world that punished vulnerability. They had been each other's first real kiss, and they would be each other's last choice. Again and again and again, for as long as eternity allowed, which as it turned out was exactly long enough.